Chapter 3 Trick or Treat. Henry Huggins was sure that this year he'd thought up a better Halloween costume than anyone else in his neighborhood. No clown suit, not for Henry. He'd thought up something different, something that no one else would think of in a million years. There was just one flaw in Henry's anticipation of Halloween. He still had not sold the new neighbor a journal subscription, and although Mr. Capper hadn't mentioned the matter, Henry knew the district manager was waiting for him to say something about it. But what could Henry say? Every time he tried to approach the house, Ranger chased him away. How the other journal carriers, especially those in the 8th grade and high school, would laugh at that. Henry was particularly worried because his father knew Mr. Capper, and if the two men happened to run into each other, Mr. Huggins would probably say, "How's Henry getting on with his route?" And Mr. Capper would answer, "He delivers papers all right, but he's a terrible salesman." Mr. Capper always said there were 3 parts to a carrier job: delivering, collecting, and selling. Then his father would say, "No more work on the clubhouse." He might even tell the boys to tear down the frame, which they'd so carefully built. After supper on Halloween, Henry tried to shove all of this to the back of his mind. It was time to get ready to go trick-or-treating, a time for fun, not a time to think about his troubles. Henry went to his room and shut the door. He got out a bottle of ink. Washable, it said on the label, and he hoped the label knew what it was talking about. And an old lipstick of his mother's. He went to work and applied paint to his face. When he finished, he didn't need a Halloween mask from the dime store like the ones the rest of the boys and girls would wear. No one would guess it was Henry Huggins under the lines and circles he had drawn on his face. Then he fastened an old belt around his head, and through it stuck a feather from one of his mother's old hats. Next, he draped a blanket around his shoulder and fastened it with safety pins. Lots of them. He needed his hands free to carry the paper bag for all the treats he would collect that evening. Henry steadied himself in the mirror and was pleased with what he saw. A fierce Indian that no one would guess was really Henry Huggins. P.S. A note from the book: don't dress up as other people's cultures. It's not cool. But moving on. But the best part of his costume was still to come. Henry opened his bedroom door. "Here, Ribsy," he called. "Come on, boy." Obediently, Ribsy trotted down the hall and into Henry's bedroom. Henry opened a bureau drawer and took out a rubber wolf mask, which he slipped over Ribsy's head. There, his costume was complete. Admittedly, Ribsy was a bit of a funny-looking black and white and brown spotted wolf, but from the neck off, he was a wolfish-looking wolf with long white fangs and a bright red tongue. It would certainly be lucky for Henry if he and Ribsy happened to meet Ranger. Boy, old Ranger would take one look at Ribsy the wolf and practically turn backwards somersaults. He would be so surprised and scared. Then he would tuck his tail between his legs and run for home as fast as he could go, with Ribsy the wolf right after him. By the time Ribsy got through with him, old Ranger would have learned which dog was boss around this neighborhood. Unfortunately, as was so often the case, this good idea of Henry's had a flaw. With a rubber mask over his head, Ribsy would not have a chance if he got into a dogfight, because he wouldn't be able to bite back. With Ranger, he probably wouldn't have a chance without a mask. It would be wisest for Henry to stay away from the new neighbor's house that evening. He didn't mind. Halloween was no time to sell a newspaper subscription. Ribsy sat down and scratched. "Hey, cut that out," ordered Henry. "You'll tear the mask." Henry went out to show off his costume to his mother and father. Mr. Huggins laughed, and Mrs. Huggins pretended to be frightened. Nosy, the cat, really was frightened. He fluffed his tail and jumped to the back of the couch, where he arched his back and kept a wary eye on the wolf. "Do you think Ribsy's going to stand for that mask very long?" asked Mr. Huggins. "I think so," said Henry, as he opened the front door. "We practiced in my room every day this week. When I finished my route, I came home and put the mask on him. He seemed sort of puzzled at first, but he's used to it now. I held him up so he could see himself in the mirror, and I think he likes it." It was the perfect night for Halloween. The stars were bright, and a north wind sent leaves skittering along the pavement. Jack-o'-lanterns grinned in front windows. Bands of children, some of them wearing costumes that glowed in the dark, trooped from door to door. Mothers of small children lurked in the shrubbery, while their little rabbits or ghosts climbed the steps and rang doorbells. Henry felt so good he did a little dance in the middle of his front lawn before he started down the street. Before Henry had time to ring the doorbell, though, he met a boy wearing a green cardboard head intended to look like the head of a man from outer space. Suddenly, the outer spaceman's eyes lit up in a fiendish and scary way that made Henry suspect his friend Murph must be inside. Murph was the only one in the neighborhood who knew enough about electricity to think up such a costume. Henry raised his hand. "Hey," he said. Silently, the spaceman held out his own hand. Henry grasped it. "Yeah!" he yelled in his own voice, because he was grasping a buzzard that Murph held in the palm of his hands. Murph laughed. "I thought it was you." He leaned over and patted Ribsy. "Hiya, Wolf. I knew you by your spots." Together, the boys trotted down Klickitat Street, ringing doorbells and shouting trick or treat. Everyone laughed at Ribsy's costume and gave Henry an extra treat for his wolf. Gradually, their bags grew fat with candy, peanuts, popcorn balls, individual boxes of raisins, apples, and bubble gum. The boys no longer stopped at every house. They compared notes with other trick-or-treaters and soon learned which people gave jelly beans or all-day suckers. These houses they skipped. They did not like jelly beans, and Henry felt that a boy who had a paper route was too grown up to lick a sucker. At one house, which was completely dark, Henry and Murph hesitated. "Should we bother?" asked Henry. "It doesn't look as if the Morgans are home." "We might as well skip it," said Murph. Just then, a car turned into the driveway and drove into the garage. The headlights revealed a garage cluttered with tools and boxes, and decorated with a collection of old license plates. On a shelf at the back, a stuffed owl with wings outstretched and claws poised for an attack stared glassily into the night. "Come on," said Henry, as Miss Morgan got out of the car. "She's got a lot of bags in the back. Maybe she just bought something good at the market." The two boys and Ribsy walked up the driveway. "Trick or treat!" shouted Henry and Murph. Murph pressed the button that lit up his outer space hat. "Oh my goodness!" Miss Morgan exclaimed. "You certainly startled me. Well, I'm afraid you will have to go ahead and play a trick." She peered into the paper bag in the back seat. "I've just come from the market, but all I bought was detergent and coffee, cat food, and some things for breakfast. I don't have a thing to treat you with." This was awkward. Henry couldn't recall a Halloween when he hadn't been treated by everyone. Why, some of the younger children in the neighborhood didn't know that trick-or-treat meant they were supposed to play a trick if they weren't given a treat. Neither Henry or Murph was prepared to play a trick. They hadn't even brought a piece of soap for soaping windows. That's all right, Mrs. Morgan," said Henry. After all, she was a very nice lady, and one of his journal customers. "Why, it's Henry Huggins!" exclaimed Mrs. Morgan. "I didn't recognize you in all that paint." Naturally, Henry was pleased that his neighbor hadn't penetrated his disguise. "That's a keen owl you have there," he remarked. "It's really fierce-looking, as if it was about to catch an animal or something." "It's a great horned owl," said Murph, whose head was full of information like this. "And those license plates go way back to 1929. "Mr. Morgan always nails the old plates on the wall every time he gets a new one," Miss Morgan said, following Henry's eyes to the owl. "Henry, since I don't have a treat for you, how would you like to have the owl?" she asked, as if she'd just had the inspiration. "Gee, Miss Morgan." Henry was almost speechless. He was so busy considering the possibilities of a stuffed owl. In his room, on his chest of drawers, or in the clubhouse? That was it, in the clubhouse. A stuffed owl was exactly what they needed for a finishing touch. "Gee, could I really have it?" "Certainly," said Miss Morgan. "You boys just climb up on that apple box and lift it down." The boys quickly obeyed before Mrs. Morgan could change her mind. Henry could scarcely believe his good fortune. The owl was at least 5 feet from wingtip to wingtip. Why, this was better than all the peanuts and popcorn balls in the world. "Thanks, Miss Morgan," said Henry. "Thanks a lot." "Oh, don't thank me," said Miss Morgan. "I've been looking for a way to get rid of that thing for years. It's too big to go in the garbage can, and the Goodwill refuses to take it." "Are you going to put it in the clubhouse?" asked Murph, when the boys had left Miss Morgan's garage. "Sure," said Henry. "Then we can call it a hunting lodge." "Nobody hunts owls," Murph pointed out. At this point, Henry could see no reason for continuing the rounds of the neighborhood. Nothing he would get could possibly be as good as a stuffed owl. Besides, carrying his paper bag and lugging the owl, which was an awkward size and shape, didn't leave him with a free hand for ringing doorbells. On their way home, Henry and Murph met a lady and a small red devil who turned out to be Beezus and, appropriately, Henry felt, Ramona. They were carrying a jack-o'-lantern that had been carved too long before Halloween. Now its lips were shriveled, and there was a smell of cooked pumpkin in the air. "A stuffed owl?" exclaimed Beezus. "How spooky! What are you going to do with it?" "Put it in the clubhouse," said Henry. "But no girls are allowed." Henry really wouldn't have minded Beezus' visiting the clubhouse, but Murph had been firm at the beginning. No girls allowed. And perhaps Murph was right. A boy who was in the business of delivering papers might be too old to play with girls. Before Beezus could answer, Ramona held up her paper bag. "We each got a nutsy," she said, and began to recite. "Nutsies give both children and adults quick energy. Avoid that mid-afternoon slump with a nutsy. Chock full of protein-rich nuts." "Jeepers," said Henry. "What does she do, memorize commercials?" "Oh, Ramona," said Beezus impatiently. "Stop reciting commercials. You don't have to believe things just because you hear them on TV." Then she turned to Henry and Murph. "Stay away from that house on the corner," she advised. "When we said trick-or-treat, they said they would like to see us do a trick for them, and why didn't we sing a little song? I guess they don't understand about Halloween." "I sang a little song," boasted Ramona, twitching her red devil's tail. "I sang, 'Crispy potato chips are the best, north or south, east or west. Crispy chips, hooray, hooray! Get your crispy chips today.'" "And the people thought it was cute," said Beezus crossly. "They asked her to do it again each time." "It's a nice song," said Ramona. "I like it." While they were standing under the streetlight, Scooter McCarthy appeared out of the darkness. He was wearing his father's old Marine uniform, without even a mask, and was licking a candy apple. "Hey, where'd you get that owl?" he asked. "Miss Morgan," answered Henry, who suspected that Scooter wanted to let everyone know his father had been a Marine. Scooter looked closer. "Sort of beat up, but not bad," he conceded. "Where'd you get the candy apple?" asked Murph. "That house where people moved in last week." "What are we waiting for?" Murph asked Henry. "Come on, let's get some candy apples." "Oh, I don't know." Henry didn't think he cared to meet Ranger while he was wearing a blanket and carrying a stuffed owl. He might trip if he tried to run. There was Ribsy to think of, too. Henry didn't want his dog to get into another fight with Ranger. "Henry's scared of their dog," said Scooter. "I am not," said Henry indignantly. "Then why do you let him chase you every day?" asked Scooter. Henry wondered how Scooter knew about this. "Come on, Murph, let's go ring the new lady's doorbell," Henry said, speaking with more confidence than he felt. He only hoped the dog would feel more friendly towards him when he was not delivering papers, and would perhaps not even recognize him with all his paint. Ranger would probably be in the house anyway. Henry wasn't going to get pushed around by a dog. If his owner was giving out candy apples, Henry was going to have a candy apple. If the worst came to the worst, he could use the owl to fend off Ranger. He also had the happy thought that it might be pretty hard for Ranger to bite him through the folds of the blanket. "Sit, Ribsy," Henry ordered, when they were in front of the house. To be on the safe side, he pulled off the rubber wolf mask. "Sit," he said again. For once, Ribsy sat. Probably he was no more eager to meet Ranger than Henry was. As the boys advanced towards the front step, Henry noted that the wind was blowing his scent away from the house. He also thought that since he was disguised with paint, the lady wouldn't recognize him, as the boy whose friend had told her the only thing she could do was prevent forest fires. That was a good thing. "You ring," he said to Murph, as he rested his bag of treats in front of his feet and held the owl in his left hand. This left his right hand free to accept the candy apple. Murph turned on his outer space eyes and rang the doorbell, while Henry braced himself. The door was opened, and the new neighbor, the one to whom Henry was so anxious to sell the journal, appeared. "Oh!" She clapped her hand to her chest and stepped back, pretending a great fright. "Trick or treat!" shouted Henry and Murph. who could not help but be pleased by her performance. Henry was glad the lady couldn't possibly recognize him. Ranger, who was trotting towards the door, saw the owl, which, with its outstretched wings, sharp claws, and glittering eyes, looking as if it were about to attack. He skidded to a stop on the hardwood floor, turned, and tried to run, but his claws couldn't dig into the slippery wood. He slipped and skidded to the edge of the carpet, where his claws could take hold, and then slunk under a chair, whimpering with fright. Old Ranger wasn't so brave after all, Henry thought, as he heard a growl behind him in the dark. Now that Ranger had turned tail, Ribsy was ready to protect his master. "Go home," Henry ordered, even though he couldn't see Ribsy. The lady bent over and looked under the chair. "What's the matter with Ranger?" she asked. "What's the matter with the boy? Come on out, baby. It's just a stuffed owl. It can't hurt you." "Baby?" The lady called that ferocious animal baby? Henry heard the jingle of license tags behind him. He noticed that Ranger heard them too. He wished he hadn't bothered with a candy apple when he already had a whole bag full of things his mother wouldn't want him to eat. At that moment, Ribsy poked his head around the door. "Why, that's the dog that got into a fight with Ranger," exclaimed the lady, holding out a tray of candy apples to Henry. "And you must be the paper boy." Henry accepted an apple. Yes," he admitted, now that his disguise had been penetrated. He used his foot to give Ribsy a shove down the steps. I'm sorry about the fight, and what Ramona said about not causing forest fires." "Oh, children and pets," said the lady, with an airy laugh. "You can never tell what little children are going to say. And I have had a lot of pets, and they are always getting into something. Don't worry about the little girl, and please don't worry about Ranger. He'll get over it." Suddenly, a word the woman had spoken repeated itself in Henry's mind. Pets. She was interested in pets. He looked at Ranger whimpering under the chair, steadied his owl, and decided to speak up. Now that the lady knew who he was, he had nothing to lose. And somehow, he felt it would be easier when he was in disguise. It was almost as if someone else was speaking instead of Henry. "My name is Henry Huggins," he began. "I'm your journal carrier. I deliver the journal to many of your neighbors. The Sunday supplement has a good column about pets you might enjoy reading." Here he paused to catch his breath and try to think of what to say next. "Well, it's about time," the lady said with a smile. "I'm Mrs. Peabody, and I have been waiting for you to come and sell me a subscription." "You have?" This possibility had never occurred to Henry. "Yes, I thought you might want to get credit for selling a subscription," answered Miss Peabody. "Oh, he does," said Murph. "It took you so long I was about to give up and phone the paper myself," Miss Peabody continued. "Please don't do that," said Henry, lest the lady change her mind. "I won't," Miss Peabody assured him. "I have a grown son who used to deliver papers when he was your age, and I know all about it." Henry wondered if she really did know anything about a paper route, things like dogs who chase paper boys. Ranger, it seemed to him, was getting over his scare. He'd poked his nose out from under the couch. "Now, don't you worry about my dog," said the lady a second time. "He felt he had to defend his property against intruders, but now that he's seen we're friends, he'll be all right." She leaned over and spoke to her dog. "Won't you, Ranger baby?" Ranger peeked out from under the couch and thumped his whip-like tail. "He really is just a lamb," said Ranger's owner. Some lamb, thought Henry, but he felt he should try to make friends with Ranger, so he gave Ribsy another shove with his foot and said, "Hey, Ranger, how's the fellow?" Ranger did not growl or bare his teeth this time, which was progress. "Well, thanks a lot for the subscription and the candy apple," said Henry. "I'll start leaving the paper tomorrow." "Good," said Mrs. Peabody. "I've missed the crossword puzzle." She didn't say one word about having the paper left in some special place. Not a word about being careful not to hit the shrubs or the windows. Henry could tell this lady was going to be a good customer. Probably she would always be home when he came to collect and would always have the exact change ready. "Good night, Harry," the lady called after him. She was such a nice lady that Henry didn't want to tell her his name was Henry, not Harry. "Well, what do you know?" remarked Henry to Murph when they were on the sidewalk once more. 2 treats, a candy apple and a journal subscription. He felt as if the burden had been taken from him. He'd actually sold another subscription. And now that he'd sold one, he was sure he could sell others. From now on, it would be easy. Murph laughed. The way old Ranger dived under his couch. He sure thought something was after him, but he didn't know what. Henry laughed, too. He laughed at the thought of Ranger skidding on the floor, and he laughed because he felt good. I've had enough, said Murph. Let's go home. Not yet, said Henry, who no longer felt like going home. Just one more house. What for? Asked Murph. We've got more junk than we can eat now. Come on, Murph, coaxed Henry. Let's stop at Mr. Capper's. I'll bet he's given something good. You just want to tell him about the subscription, said Murph. Yep, answered Henry. It was true. News like this couldn't wait until tomorrow. Now it would be safe for his father to talk to Mr. Capper, who would tell him Henry was a good salesman. There was no danger of his father telling him to tear down the clubhouse now. Okay, agreed Murph, and the boys started towards Mr. Capper's house with the good news.